we do have a central sulcus. And I would say, what's a shallow depression? Be specific. So that means the shallow depression has to have a specific name. It's the central sulcus. This is the precentral gyrus. Be specific. What's his bump? This is the postcentral gyrus. Be specific. What's his bump? What's this bump or this shallow depression in general would just be gyrus versus sulcus. Again, the longitudinal fissure, the lateral sulcus, the transverse fissure between the cerebrum and the cerebellum, okay, would be, and I'd say for fissure, crack, what's the name of this crack? Okay, the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe, and the question would be, what lobe is this? Even if you write lobe, you get a half point, okay? So it's not that bad. And again, this dark brown thing represents the cerebellum. Okay, on the base of the brain, we have several anatomical features. So these white antennas here represent the olfactory tract. If you're afraid of spelling olfactory, you can use capital C, capital N, capital I for cranial nerve 1, and then write tract. The end of the tract here, the end of the antennas, are the olfactory bulbs. And again, you can do capital C, capital N, capital I, and then write bulb for cranial nerve 1, the end of the bulb. Okay, this dingling here, this ball, represents the pituitary gland. And this is always on the practical, this wire here that dangles a pituitary gland. This is called an infundibulum. It's my anatomical favorite term. Okay, if you have a favorite anatomical term. So infundibulum because it has fun in it, okay? But women have infundibulum over the ovary, part of the uterine tube. Infundibulum, okay? So the pituitary gland is dangled by the infundibulum stalk, okay? So everybody get the inferior structures, right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so now we're gonna open up the brain, and when we open it up, it's going to look very similar to the figure on your practical exam number 4 requirement sheet. That's a bad copy of it, but it looks very similar to this. Okay, so there's a lot of things to identify, except this is like a 2D view. So we're not going to be able to identify everything on the list by this view, okay? So, so let's start from the top. This white arch here is the corpus callosum. Corpus callosum. This, and I'll say this is a thin membrane. What's the name of this membrane? Is the septum pellucidum that separates your 2 lateral ventricles. This white structure here, is the fornix. And the fornix is axon tracts from the hypothalamus to the hippocampus. And then this pink structure here represents one of the choroid plexus. You don't have to know which one, but it's of the 3rd ventricle. So this pink thing is the choroid plexus. This oval structure, kind of a little bit smaller than an almond, this oval structure. The question would be, what's this structure name? This is the thalamus. This is the thalamus. However, if I ask what's this ventricle, and I'm pointing to the same thing, it's the 3rd ventricle, okay? And even if you write ventricle, you get a half point, okay? This is the 3rd ventricle. This structure is the thalamus, and you can always clarify during the practical. This brown dot represents the intermediate mass. Intermediate mass, that kind of like the little anatomical snap, snapping the 2 thalami together. The hypothalamus goes from the optic chiasm to the mammillary body. So this region here is the hypothalamus. Hypo, it's below the thalamus, right? So the optic chiasm is where the optic nerve crisscross. The infundibulum is part of the hypothalamus, and the mammillary body This is for licking reflexes. This is also for your mind and body connection. Like if you think you're sick, you're going to feel sick, okay? Your mammillary bodies, okay? So the hypothalamus includes those three structures. Okay, so the third ventricle, you see a little passageway going from the third ventricle to the fourth ventricle, and I'll show you the fourth ventricle on the other side because this one kind of got clipped off. This is the cerebral aqueduct for the travel of water. So the cerebral spinal fluid is going southbound. Cerebral aqueduct to the fourth ventricle. Let me just pick up this side real quick to show. It doesn't show it good. Is there a muscle head over there? No muscle head? Let's just stop for a sec. Let me grab muscle head.